Hey guys, Tarke here, and I thought that I'd just sort of do a brief explanation of how I reached my conclusions for what I currently believe my raiding main will be in Legion. As you know, I will be playing Legion. It comes out in just under a week now, I believe. And I just figured some of you guys might be interested in knowing how I came to pick what I wanted to pick, and it might help some of you pick what you want to play if you still haven't decided what you're doing. Now, I went through a lot of classes when it came to picking my current main. Hopefully it doesn't change again. Originally going into the expansion, I didn't have a guild. I was expecting that I would just be washed up on a server somewhere and I would try and apply. So knowing that, I didn't want to tank. Usually I play a tank. Now the reason why I didn't want to pick a tank, and when I was considering that I'd be applying into guilds, is most guilds worth joining already have tanks. It's very rare unless someone is leaving, or if, something horrible has happened, or a massive fight has happened, or a guild is reformed. Generally speaking, the tanking thing is set, So if you're planning on being a tank and you want to, join a guild, maybe it might be easy for you to make one with a few friends, or you might just spend a bit longer searching. So anyway, tanks I ruled out. Healers, I've never really been a healer in PvE. At like a proper raiding level for much time. I did do a little bit of Discipline Priest and Wrath, but I was a Shadow Priest who got forced into healing and then got stuck with it for half a tier. But anyway, so healing I wasn't really that interested, so I just rocked that out. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to be playing a DPS most likely. Let's go through the DPS and let's see, what sort of appeals to me. Now, my first DPS main when it comes to our period was a hunter. I was a hunter for BC and Wrath, and at the time I had a lot of fun with hunter. The rotation was somewhat simple, but there were some complexities about lining up trinket windows and the damage you could pull off with lining up your auto attacks and your trinket windows was crazy in comparison to a hunter who wasn't doing that, and I had a lot of fun with that. So I sort of looked into Hunter going into the Legion. I went through the different specs, and just to iterate off the bat with the way that the artifact system works. If you don't know briefly, when Legion comes out, literally the first quest you do, depending on what spec you are, you get given a mighty artifact. So for example, Ret Paladins get given the Ashbringer. So every single Ret Pally who's ever existed, level 100, they go into Legion, they get given the Ashbringer. It's a weapon you don't replace for the entire expansion. No other weapons drop, it's just your artifact. Your artifact, when you open it, has a talent tree in it, kind of like old school WoW talents, or for the PoE guys, a PoE skill tree. It has that system in there. You grind XP, you put it into your weapon, you fill in all the talents, you fully unlock the weapon, PogChamp. Now let's say that I am the Ret Pally in this case, and I've got a fully upgraded Ashbringer, and suddenly someone says, Tarke, we want you to heal. I then go and do the quest. I get my big healing hammer. Now, I can't take the power out. I can respec my Ashbringer, but I can't take the power out of it and put in my other weapon. So I was very wary of classes where I want to be playing multiple specs. I kind of wanted to pick something where I would just be playing the one spec, because I am a streamer, because I plan on streaming Path of Exile and playing Legion. I didn't want to be in a position where I was having to maintain or juggle multiple specializations, multiple artifact weapons, run into the risk of, having to do a massive regrind, X many weeks in because my guild needed me to do something different, right? So I was very dubious of the, pure DPS classes initially, right? So with Hunter, it was okay, I don't like melee survival in the fact that while the spec itself is kind of cool, good luck getting into a guild as a hunter and then turning on and saying, oh, actually for this tier I'm going melee. Most guilds have an issue of there are X many slots you can bring. So you have the 2 tanks, you have the 3 to 4 healers, which shrinks down as you get into farm. And then you have we'll bring our 5 melee DPS, maybe 7 melee DPS, and then everyone else is just ranged, right? You're never really going to be in a situation where you have, let's say it's a small group. You've got your 2 tanks, you've got your 3 healers, you've got 2 melee and 3 range. Let's say it's just a 10-man group. You're now going to be in the situation of this where, the ranged hunter goes, oh, by the way, guys, I'm going survival this tier. Your raid leader is not letting you do that. He's saying, no, We need the ranged. Sod off. So survival, instinctively, I'm just like, no, I'm not playing that. So that left me with Marksman and BM. Now, Marksman has a really clunky rotation, at least to me. It just feels bizarre. The reason being is we only have 2 moves which have a cast. There's aim shot, which is a cast you have to stand still, which feels kind of odd to me because I'm always used to, hunters being the mobile spec or whatever. Have to stand still, do my hard cast. Cool. And there's barrage, which is a channel, and that you can move. So that's not too bad. Those are your only 2 abilities which cost focus, which is a hunter's main resource. We then have a few other abilities which generate focus. They're all instant cast, and when you take the correct spec where you pick up Sidewinders, you replace multiple abilities with just 1 button. So you end up with this like very basic 3-4 button rotation of these are my 2 spenders, but they both have a like cast or a channel time associated with them, and this is the 1 button I press to generate, which is instant on a cooldown. It just felt weird. I'm like, I don't want to play Marksman. Marksman can go in. BM, I actually quite like BM. Even though BM's gotten a bit of a weird reputation going to Legion as like the noob spec or like the super basic spec. It's pretty cool. Visually, it's very satisfying to play. It's quite smooth to play. It has a lot of procs. It has a lot of resets. So you have this thing of like, you're just like tracking cooldowns, waiting for the next reset, and you get these crazy windows of like, oh, this reset this, which reset this. Your main cooldown is Bestial Wrath. Every time you use Dire Beast, it reduces the cooldown of Bestial Wrath by 30 seconds. So if you get the perfect window, you're like just like spamming Bestial Wrath, doing crazy damage, and it's not the most like intense rotation in the world. It's pretty easy to execute, but I actually quite liked it. Now, I didn't pick Hunter in the end because even though I actually really liked BM and I'd played Hunter in the past, I wanted something a bit more engaged, right? So again, sticking to the system, but I didn't really want to play something which has multiple specs. That was something which kind of put me off Hunter initially. I pretty much straight off ruled off Mage, ruled off Lock, ruled off Rogue. I just didn't want to be in a situation where I felt like I had to maintain multiple artifacts and stream, and it would just get kind of messy. So I'm like, okay, so that leaves me with the hybrid classes, basically. Rep Pally, sort of Chamois, Shadow Priest, Druid to an extent, and Monk. Monk off the bat, Windwalker. Really fun to play. Really, really fun to play. Very good playstyle. My issue with it being, I just didn't like the artifact. I didn't find the artifacts interesting. And the whole thing with Legion is you get this mighty artifact weapon, and it just seemed like a bit of a waste that in an expansion which is all about class fantasy, and this is the expansion where you get this powerful thing, so not be that into the powerful thing that you're getting. It just seemed like a weird disconnect. So I'm just like, I really like the playstyle, really enjoyed it. I've played a monk in the past, played a monk throughout WoD. I was just like, and also since I had played a monk before, I kind of wanted something different. I wanted to try something fresh. So that just went off to the side. I was initially very locked into Elemental Chamois. I was very, very much considering Ellie Chamois. My issue with Chamois is I'm someone who likes to dabble in PvP. I've been a guy who's only PvP'd for many expansions. With Legion, my plan was to mostly just raid. Also, apologies, I've got a lot of sun coming in. That's why I've got this lovely washed out face. But anyway, I'm someone who likes the PvP. I have been a PvP main before, but for Legion, I want to mostly raid with some PvP on the side. Ellie Chamois and PvP are pretty dog. They are terrible. So that kind of ruled out a spec I was actually quite looking forward to. So Ellie's like, off the bat, nope. Enhance, for some reason, I just didn't enjoy the playstyle of it. I preferred previous iterations of Enhancement Chamois, which is weird. Most people think that this is the best Enhance it's ever been. Personally, I just don't really like it, and again, it feels kind of wonky in PvP, so that I just pushed to the side. Druids. Boomkin. Boomkin's a weird one. It has like a lot of instant cast spells, it has some dots to manage, and it has some long casts. I'm typically someone who doesn't like long casts. I've played a lot of casters in the past, but I generally like to have lots of short casts rather than I'm sitting here with my 2.5 seconds. 2.5 seconds. I've never really enjoyed that playstyle. So Mimkin kind of just got ruled out for the fact that some of its casts are a bit longer. The playstyle isn't that amazing. Just Feral, I'll get back to you later. Shadow Priest. Now, Shadow Priest was Bay. Shadow Priest was the one. I will be the Shadow Priest. The reason being, it has dot management, it has a rather interesting rotation, visually it's really cool, the artifact was really interesting, everything about it just seemed right. Then Mim came along. Mim ruined my Shadow Priest. The reason being that Mim ruined my Shadow Priest is when I was in Berlin with him. He was one of my mods who went with me to the big Pee-wee Berlin meetup. On the flight back, he's talking about how him and a bunch of his mates are making a guild. I'm like, oh, interesting, because again, I didn't think I had a guild going into Legion. So I'm like, oh, cool, cool, cool. He's like, yeah, we really need a tank. I'm like, ooh, I've been a tank. I've been a tank for a long time. And I didn't think I was going to be able to tank in Legion because, you know, the whole guild issue. I could join, and I could get some people, because they said they had like six. They said there was something like, there's 6 of us, we need a few more people, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I could tank for you, so that solves your tanking problem, and I could get you a few people. And they're like, ooh. So I come home, and I start researching all the tank classes. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. What tanks really connect with Tarke? Now, in WoD, I was a Brewmaster Monk and a Blood DK. Brewmaster going into Legion, the artifact is a stick with a keg on the end. It looks kind of cool the way you carry it over your shoulder, that I like, but it's a stick with a keg on the end, and all the variations are sticks with kegs on the end. For some people, sticks with kegs are cool. For me, it's a stick. Dude has Ashbringer. Dude has Doomhammer. I have a stick. It's just like... Sorry, Brewmaster, go away. So Brewmaster, I just like, no, I'm not playing that. Death Knight. They changed the rune system. The rune system was one of my favorite things about Death Knight. If you didn't know, we basically had 6 runes, 3 sets of 2, right? So we had 2 runes, 2 runes, 2 runes, and we had runic power. Some moves would cost blood runes, some would cost unholy runes, some would cost frost runes. Right? So the rotation was track my runes, make sure I always have a blood rune available for this particular ability. All of these generate runic power, spend my runic power. It had a very nice natural flow to it. Someone who was new to the class might struggle with it, but once you picked up with it, it actually became very organic gameplay. It just like, it became natural. It just became like a second sense of you just like monitoring your runes. You could convert your rune into like a universal rune, which anything could use. And it just like, it was a really nice fluid system, and I loved the rune gameplay. In Legion, they said there are 1 type of rune. You just have 6 runes, and everything can use them. And I'm like, ugh. Boring rune system. They changed a lot of the core, like, fundamentals of the spec. I've always been bothered by the lack of mobility that Death Knight has. They added Wraith Walk, which is just ability copy-pasted out of Heroes of the Storm. You just go into a ghost and you move quicker. It looks good, but... Sorry, Blood DK. Nope. So I instantly ruled those 2 out. So that leaves me with the Prot Warrior, the Prot Pally, the Bear, and the Vengeance Demon Hunter. Prot Warrior and Prot Pally. Let's get those 2 out of the way first. Both of them, amazing tanks. Prot Warrior, Prot Pally, Bear look like the best 3 tanks as last I've looked going into Legion. Both the Prot Warrior and the Prot Pally just have amazing cooldowns baked into their core kit. They can just mitigate all of the things, and it's pretty basic to play. Like, it's pretty straightforward. Now, because I've mostly tanked as a Brewmaster Monk and a Blood DK in the past, they're quite reactive tanks. It's like they take the damage and then they mitigate it afterwards. So the Monk, you get hit, you then stagger as their mechanic. So if I get hit for 100, say 20% of that gets turned into a damage over time effect. That damage of time keeps building as I keep getting hit more and more, and then I can wipe the stagger. So basically I take a massive hit and then I just clear half the damage off. So that's quite fun gameplay. There's like skill involved in tracking it, and it's like fun. Blood DKs, the way they work is they take bigger hits, but they have a lot of healing. So it's like they get hit hard, but then they heal back up. So it's reactive gameplay rather than pressing a button before you get hit, which is sort of how, you know, prop pallies and prop warriors work. Is like, there's a hit coming, I press my mitigation, I take no damage. That to me is less interesting because I'm used to the other playstyle. So those two kind of just got pushed off to the side because of that reason. I like reacting to things. Vengeance Demon Hunter suddenly looked really interesting because it basically is the Death Knight model, but with mobility. And I'm like, well, I like classes with mobility. I've enjoyed my Death Knight in the past, but I turned it down because it didn't have mobility. Vengeance is Bay. Vengeance then seemed like the perfect choice for me. And, you know, if I was tanking Legion, it probably still would be the perfect choice. The problem is I'm not tanking Legion anymore. So I'd picked Vengeance Demon Hunter. Seemed perfect for me. I really liked the mobility. Bit frustrating the fact that we could play Demon Hunters before Legion came out, but with access to only like a fifth of their moveset, which is quite frustrating. And being the diligent, you know, Demon Hunter to be that I am, I start researching, you know, the state of Demon Hunters in Legion. I do become slightly concerned. Now, the concerns rise in the fact that, as stated, they take a bigger hit than a warrior would and then heal afterwards. Now, this is fine until you get into scary damage or bad healer territory. When you get into bad healer territory, a bad healer is going to have a much better time with a warrior, because the warrior just takes less damage. It's a lot easier for the healer to react to less damage than suddenly, oh my god, why is my tank on 10% HP? The bad healer in this case may not know, well, he's about to heal straight back up, or whatever, and start panicking, start wasting cooldowns. You suddenly need a lot more coordination or a lot more trust in your healers. This guild, while I trust the people in it, you know, I'd only played with one of the healers before in a PvP scenario. The other two I didn't know very well, hadn't played with. So, you know, we didn't have that good communication going into it. I'm like, well, for progress, me playing a very spiky tank with healers that I haven't got much of a history with, that may not be the best thing. Also, there was like a lot of talk about how they were amazing for Mythic Plus because of their mobility and their AoE, but when you start getting into like actual Mythic raid progress, you get into some issues. Now, my guild is mostly heroic focused, but there are quite a few guys in there like, yeah, we're doing our heroic and then we're going into Mythic. So Vengeance seemed kind of iffy, and around about this point, someone else in the guild really wanted to step up as a Brewmaster Monk, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to let you have this one. So I go, you are the new tank, I'll go back to DPSing. Seems good. Also, something worth fitting in as a caveat is I am the raid leader for this guild. So that then becomes a decision, because I'm like, okay, so I'm back to trying to pick a DPS, but I don't want to be playing a class which will distract from my raid leading. And one of the things which I found really attractive about Shadow Priest going into the expansion was Surrender to Madness. The way that Surrender to Madness works, if I haven't covered it already, is it's a 10-minute cooldown. You press this button, all of your abilities generate 150% more insanity. Insanity is the core mechanic of Shadow Priest now. All of our abilities generate insanity. It's just a bar which fills up. Think Fury, right? So all of our abilities generate insanity or Fury. When we get to 100 insanity, we press Void Form button, or Void Eruption. We do this big spell. We turn into like a Void Priest. While in Void Priest mode, every second we're in it, we gain 1% haste. As you can imagine, for a caster, having your haste ramping up means you're just casting really quickly and your damage output is going through the roof. The balance in this is for every second that we're in it, we gain haste, but we lose insanity. So our insanity bar, which goes full, we enter the form, it starts draining down. Every time we cast abilities, we keep gaining more. So it's kind of like it just bounces back and forth. It gets low, you spam a bunch of abilities, it peaks up a bit. But the longer you're in it, the harder it is to stay in insanity form. When it reaches 0, it ends. Right? And you go back to normal Shadow Priest gameplay. With Surrender to Madness, you gain 150% more sanity, but when you reach 0, you die. Horribly. And you can't be combat resed. So there's none of this, you can't cheese fights by like, oh, we're going to take, you know, a Shadow Priest in, he's Surrender to Madness at the start, we then just res him. You can't do that. It's that you are dead for the entire fight. So it's a pretty big button. It has a lot of damage, it has a lot of power in it. and you will be using it a lot because it's a lot of damage and a lot of power when it comes to raiding. Now, because the whole thing of if you mess up your rotation while in void form, the void form ends and you die horribly, raid leading and Surrender to Madness doesn't go very well hand in hand. Especially on progress fights on farm, it wouldn't be that much of an issue. I'm sure I'll be able to manage both. But on progress, where the fights are kind of shaky, people don't really know what they're doing, people are making mistakes, and like, you know, when you go into a fight and you have the perfect laid out plan, Zolhar from HFC is a good example of that. You have the perfect execution plan, someone messes up and you suddenly need to come up with a whole new thing, and you need to suddenly get the whole group to move all their position around and half the floor is on fire, and you're like, ah. That plus Surrender to Madness doesn't have very good synergy, because I knew that what would happen is I would press Surrender to Madness, and then all you would hear is angry typing over voice comms. You would not hear any your actual, like, this is raid leading. You would just hear angry rotation. So I'm like, I probably can't raid lead in Shadow Priest, so let's get rid of the beloved Shadow Priest. I still didn't want to pick a pure DPS class, even though I actually was really tempted by BM Hunter, because BM Hunter would be pretty much perfect for raid leading in the fact that it's a playstyle I found it engaging, in the fact that I like cooldowns coming up, I liked the visuals of it, and it's pretty basic to play. Would be really good with raid leading, but it was a bit, you know, it was a bit too basic to play, and it didn't. If I played it, I would be disappointed that I wasn't playing a Shadow Priest, for example. So I was trying to find the Shadow Priest in a less hectic form. Alright, I kind of want to find Shadow Priest 2.0. So I started going through all the dot classes, because I do like having some micromanagement. The only dot classes, including the pures, you basically have Affliction Warlocks, obviously, Shadow Priest, Boomkins, Assassination Rogues, Unholy Death Knights, and Feral Druids, right? I didn't want to be on a pure DPS class, so that gets rid of the Warlock, that gets rid of the Rogue. The Shadow Priest is obviously getting rid of, so that left me with the Boomkin, the Feral, and the Unholy Death Knight. Right. Unholy Frost, 2 different specs. There would be some cases you might want to swap. The rune system got heavily gutted, as I said before, so I really don't want to play Death Knight. So that leaves me with the Boomkin, and that leaves me with the Feral. I don't like long cast times. That gets rid of the Boomkin. So that leaves me with Feral. Now, funnily enough, I really hated Feral gameplay. I could not stand Feral gameplay. Going onto the PTR, and the PTR is still active. Anyone right now can go onto the PTR and they can make a level 100 pre-made character, practice rotations on the dummy. I couldn't stand the Feral rotation on the dummy. It seemed really clunky. You have energy, you have combo points. I've played energy classes before. You had multiple buffs you had to keep up. It just seemed really wonky. And I said, I'm not playing this. I'm not playing this at all. I remember my girlfriend was over at the time, and I was trying to work out what to play, and I'm like, oh, Feral seems cool. And then I played it, I'm like, oh, I don't want to play Feral. She's like, what are you playing then? You playing like a Hunter? I'm like, oh, I might play Hunter. And then I left the room, did some reading, came back, and I'm like, you know, Feral seems cool. She's like, you just said you hate the spec. Yeah, I do hate the spec, but it seems really cool. And this basically went on for a few days of me going, yeah, Feral seems really cool. But she's like, you said you hate it. Yeah, I do hate it. I can't stand the gameplay, but I kind of like it. So I do a bunch of research, and I actually really like Feral. The thing which I like about it is that it has a really complicated rotation, but once you learn the complicated rotation, it's not that complicated. The reason why it's complicated is snapshotting. So Feral is the only class and or spec which still has snapshotting in the game. You apply bleed with all of your buffs up for the full duration of the bleed, even once your buffs have worn off, because you applied it with all of your buffs active. It is like a super bleed, right? And then what you do is you refresh the bleed or the damage time effect with mechanics which refresh but don't overwrite the dot, right? So Affliction gameplay used to be all about this. It used to be all about waiting for all of your stuff to proc at once. You apply super dots, and then you refresh the dots without overriding them, and you're doing ridiculous damage the whole way through. This is obviously ridiculously powerful if managed correctly, and so it got removed entirely from the game, except for Feral Druid. They kept it in for Feral Druid because it's been part of their core kit for so long, and for some reason they thought it was fine for Druids to have Snapshotting. So Druid has multiple abilities which buff you and the moves you apply for their full duration. An example being Blood Talons. Blood Talons is our level 100 talent. Every time we Healing Touch, we get Blood Talons, which is the next 2 damaging spells we cast deal 40% increased damage for their full duration. And you're saying, what? So after like hard cast Healing Touch? Sort of. Whenever we use 5 combo points, our next Healing Touch, Entangling Roots, or Rebirth is instant. So the way it works is we use a finishing move, which spends our 5 combo points. We get the instant Healing Touch proc. We cast Healing Touch. We get Blood Talons. So the perfect scenario is you spend your 5 combo points. You get the instant Healing Touch. You don't use it right away. You wait. You get up to 4 combo points. You then Healing Touch. You then apply Rake, which is a combo point generator bleed with the buffed Healing Touch. And you then apply Rip, which is a combo point spender bleed, right? So it lines up perfectly. Nice clean gameplay. It takes a while to get used to, and it's about maintaining those, those buffs. Pretty straightforward. So that was like my base. Okay, I'm going to pick Feral Druid. You can just kind of see how I went through all the classes. Another thing I did, and this is something which I recommend all people to do who are in a like pre-guild setup, or like we have a group of X many people, we're trying to work out what we do, is just take the time to write down what people are playing. So let me give you an example. So here is my current like guild lineup. There's currently 17 of us, maybe. If someone has a question mark next to that name, it means they're maybe playing, or they're undecided on what they want to play. So what I did is I put the name of everyone in the guild, I put their class, I then put their utility. The reason why I put the utility in is it's important to know like what you're missing, what you have. So for example, if in our entire guild we didn't have anyone with a combat res, and I was trying to pick what class I should play, it'd be pretty obvious that I should pick a class which has a combat res. Or for example, if no one in the entire guild had access to Bloodlust, it'd be really important that I picked a class which had access to Bloodlust. So when you do it like this, you can see what you have a lot of, and what you have not much of, and what utility you're potentially missing. So right off the bat, we have 2 tanks. So I know, well, I'm not going to be playing a tank. We have 3 healers. Having a 4th healer, we could make it work, but if I was picking a 4th healer at this point, I would know that, the second we got out of progression, I would be forced to reroll into DPS, because the way that, good raiding guilds work is as you get into farm, you take your healers and you make them go DPS, so you raid faster, so that, stuff becomes more efficient. So if this was the guild that I was looking to apply into, I could say, well, we could either have a Holy Paladin or a Resto Druid. That'd be really powerful with the lineup, but I'd most likely be going into, Ret Paladin or Boomkin or Feral, the second we came out of progression. So, maybe that wouldn't be a good fit for me. You would look at our melee DPS and you'd say, actually, we have quite a lot of melee DPS, so I'm probably not going to pick another melee DPS, but, let's say that I was going to pick a melee DPS, I'd go through and say, okay, we have a Feral, we have a Rogue, we have an Enhanced Chamois, a Havoc Demon Hunter, we have a Fury Warrior. What are we missing? Well, Ret Pallies have amazing utility. They have good buffs, their damage is okay. Looking at this lineup, I would probably pick a Ret Paladin. If not that, I would pick something which offers more utility. Right? So you can sort of see how you can just quite easily fill in the gaps when you make a proper list like this. Going into the ranged DPS, we have someone who's undecided. We have a Warlock. Because we have a Warlock, and Warlocks aren't that amazing, we don't really need a second one. We already have the health stones, we have the gateway, we already have the combat res. We have a lot of combat res because we have a lot of druids. So I don't need to worry about that. We have a Boomkin, so we have AoE silence, we have Typhoon, we have a combat res. Cool. We have a lot of AoE stuns in our lineup, so it's not like we desperately need someone who can stun certain adds. We have a Shadow Priest, we get Mass Dispel, another AoE stun, we get some silences. We have a Hunter, they just give a stun. I kind of wish Hunters gave more utility, but anyway, I'm getting distracted. And we have another Boomkin. So look at this lineup where we already have 2 Boomkins and a Feral Druid. Picking another Druid might not be the best idea when it comes to, people getting gear and stuff. So if I was applying into this guild, and I wanted to be a ranged DPS, the obvious choice would be a mage, because mages are always amazing damage dealing classes. Always. There currently isn't any. I have very little competition when it comes to cloth, in the fact that, yeah, okay, there's the Lock and the Shadow Priest, but when it comes to the way that tier sets and legendaries work, there isn't actually that much flexibility in the gear you wear. So, for example, you have the weapon that you're never going to be upgrading. You have your set bonus, and then you have, like, your legendary. So let's say your legendary is a glove, right? You're never going to replace your gloves, and you're forced to get your 4 set bonus on your other pieces. So stuff like wrist and belt. Warlocks have a legendary wrist. Let's say that Shadow is a legendary belt. Well, I'll be able to get off pieces of cloth really easily. Kind of see my reasoning? Does that sort of make sense? Alternatively, you could say, well, another hunter would also fit quite nicely in there. Hunters are always pretty good. We only currently have 1 hunter and 1 chamois, so there's not much competition on the male slot. There's quite a lot of competition for agility trinkets in this current lineup, if you look at it, because you have a feral, you have a rogue, you have enhance, you have havoc, you have hunter. So that feels kind of bad. So that's another thing for the melees. If you were picking another melee in this lineup, you'd probably pick a strength user ideally, because currently for strength we only have a prot warrior and a fury warrior, right? So you're likely to get your trinkets, your DPS trinkets, really early on. So that's why Rep Pally would sort of work, or maybe Death Knight, or you get my reasoning, right? So yeah, I'm playing a feral druid. I know this has been a bit of a sort of a long-winded video, and it's sort of been fairly anecdotal, but I thought some of you might find it interesting, and it might help someone out there work out what they want to play. I still have a lot of friends who are like bouncing between different specs every other day. I was in a case myself, like a few days ago, where I would walk into my room saying I'm playing X, walk out of my room and change my mind in just the process of, opening and closing a door. My personal recommendations for someone who just wants, like, but Tarke, please tell me, what do I play? Specs which I would really recommend, which are very viable at the moment. I really like the gameplay of Fire and Frost Mage. I really like Shadow Priest. I really like Elemental Chamois if you're only doing PvE. I know Ellie Chamois isn't the most viable spec, but, that I really like. I really like BM Hunter. Those are would be my go-to recommendations for ranged. I've never been a massive fan of Warlocks, even though I have been a Warlock in the past. They don't connect me for some reason. For melee, I would really recommend both of the Death Knight specs, even though I hate what they've done to the rune system. They're 2 very flashy specs, which have good gameplay. Both specs are very viable right now. They just work really well. But for me, it doesn't work out like that. Maybe I would recommend Feral to people, although I really wouldn't recommend Feral to people. I would probably recommend maybe Assassination Rogue instead. The reason why I recommend that instead of Feral is Feral's rotation is really weird, and I like it because I like life being difficult. And Feral is... Sorry, Cam. Feral has always been a very underrepresented spec. It's like, people very rarely say, oh, we really need a Feral to fill this slot. So, maybe Windwalk would be a better option, maybe Rogue would be a better option if you want that kind of gameplay. I've just picked the other 2 melee energy classes. For healers, anyone that wants to be a healer, Holy Paladin interests me the most out of all of the healers. I really like the way it just looks with the giant hammer. I think it's awesome. I like that they're melee, finally. I really like Holy Paladins going forward. Mystery of the Monks, also, I've heard amazing things about. So those would be like my go-to picks for that. For the tanking scene, Vengeance Demon Hunter. Just because of the whole mobility thing. It does have that issue with spike damage, though. If you want something which is very well-rounded, The Guardian Druid is incredibly well-rounded. It's looking super viable. It has potential to spec into other things if need be. If you just want purely power, go prot Paladin or prot Warrior. Those would be my base class recommendations. That is how I came to playing a Feral Druid in Legion. Hopefully between, you know, the next 6 days between Legion coming out, I don't change my mind again. But that is how I came to my conclusions. I'm Tarke. I will continue to upload PoE content because, again, I am a PoE streamer, guys. Don't freak out. I'm just enjoying some World of Warcraft at the moment. And I will continue to make WoW discussion videos, and I will be throwing up some guides as we get into Legion and we actually get our hands on the game. PogChamp. See you later. Have a good day. Bye-bye.